Hi everyone, Marilla here, and today we are going to look over the Nouthuca teams. In fact, Kemcoop and I have been managing this thread on Smogon forums, and we have the Pokepaste and the rental codes of these top teams from Nouthuca. But usually these blogs have explanations on how they came up with the team, how to use the team, what matchups to be careful about, and that part is really difficult for someone who doesn't speak any Japanese to understand. So let's go over these blogs and see what they're saying about each of these teams. So let's look at this first team by Almond, and it has Dragonite, Magnezone, Tapu Fini, Slowking Galar, Marowak, and Porygon 2. So this team is based around winning with a defensive win condition, physically defensive Dragonite with DD Roost, and physically defensive Porygon 2 with Max Steel Spike. Both of these are capable of setting up Dragonite with the Airstream and Dragon Dance, and Porygon 2 with the Max Steel Spike, further boosting its defense. And this makes them really hard to take out. They can basically sit on the field and just win just like that. So these two are able to cover a broad portion of the metagame, but there are a few special threats that are able to really punish these two Pokemon. So the two Pokemon that they were a bit concerned about was first Magnezone, and second Special Porygon 2 with Tri-Attack being a potential concern for the physically defensive Porygon 2, and Ice Beam, of course, hitting the Dragonite pretty hard. And that is why they have Magnezone, Specs Magnezone, and Marowak, Alola Marowak. So those two Pokemon are able to kind of switch in very freely to both Porygon 2 and Magnezone, and they are able to basically go for they're able to switch in and they're able to wall break. Once they're in, especially for example Marowak against the Magnezone, it gets a completely free switch in, and once Marowak is safe on the field like this, it is just getting a kill. It is really difficult to switch in. Usually the problem with Marowak is that it doesn't get much of an opportunity to switch in, but because this Marowak is more of a role player targeting specific matchups, they don't really have to worry about all that. And those two are the main wall breakers. And second, they felt a bit weak to Zapdos, which is fair because the Porygon 2 is physically defensive. That means that they're going to take a lot from Max Airstream. And Magnezone can kind of mid-ground into Zapdos somewhat, but it's not a completely safe switch-in. So I do feel they made a good decision to go with second Zapdos check, which is Slowking Galar. With the Assault Vest, it is really difficult for any special attacker to break through, and it is able to regenerate any damage it takes from Volt Switch. And finally, they have Tapu Fini. Scarf Tapu Fini is able to kind of act as check to the Yawn setters, Yawn Stealth Rock setters, which are actually pretty threatening. So, for example, Swampert. Swampert has really great matchup against most of their teams. So that means that, and I would say Earthquake Swampert has like even taking Finny into account, like an Earthquake Swampert or something like that could really give this team a lot of trouble. But still, Finny is there to help against the Yawn setters, because a lot of Swamperts these days are usually just flip turn plus protect, which means that they are basically going to give Finny a free switch in, or at the very least just the best case scenario for them is to just kind of flip turn out and do that as retain momentum. So they say they also tried Life Orb Ninetales Alola, which because they felt like they had a bit of trouble against first League Dynamax setters and also the Yawn users. So they felt that a Life Orb Ninetales Alola could kind of cover both matchups, but in practice they felt like it wasn't quite good enough uh, against the Yawn, so they swapped to a Scarfini. And yeah, that is basically the concept of the team. They are gonna try to cycle around with these defensive win conditions, but it is more of an offensive cycle because Specs Magnezone, Marowak Alola, and also the future sight from the Slowking Galar, all of these kind of combine to break opposing cycle teams pretty effectively. So yeah, let's look at the EV spreads and let look at any kind of comment they have. So they are saying with the for the Dragonite, they are focused on physical defense. Of course, they say +1 a dual wing beat is able to one-hit KO Urshifu. So that is a pretty important calc. So 12 attack EVs, not much, and that is pretty impactful calc. And Porygon 2 is basically fully physically defensive. 244 HP, 252 defense, pretty standard. Has Tri-Attack, Iron Tail, Foul Play, and Recover. So it is basically gonna try to use Max Steel Spike to handle, not only just handle things like Nihilego, which is a pretty relevant Pokemon, but also it is able to kind of further boost its physical defense. So that it is notable that they do not have Ice Beam, which physically defensive Porygon 2 really does like to have in order to actually hit the Landorus T and Dragonite. But personally, I do really like this setup because Foul Play is gonna, if you set up your physical attack enough for your physical attacker to actually break through Porygon 2, Foul Play is just gonna obliterate them, so it doesn't really matter that they are missing Ice Beam. And in fact, not having to use Ice Beam against something like Dragonite could help them stave off any potential disaster from weakness policy. So I think that is a pretty good call. And Magnezone, instead of Assault Vest, it is Specs Analytic Magnezone. It is pretty strong at that. And it is Discharge, Volt Switch, Flash Cannon, and Rest. And Rest is basically there to kind of win potential timer situations against things like Toxapex. It doesn't say that on the RMD, but I know that's basically what it's for. And what else? Yeah, it's basically mostly focused on having more special it has more special defense than physical defense, so it is able to kind of force the Porygon to get an attack boost. So that is pretty relevant because you are using this Magnezone to help against Porygon 2. And the rest are in HP and special attack. Marowak is has max attack because it is designed to be very hard to switch in, right? That is its goal, and it is fast enough to outspeed a lot of these defensive switch heavy Tyranitar spreads, right? So Tyranitar does have the type advantage against Marowak Alola, but if Marowak is faster, Earthquake after a Sword Stance would just completely obliterate it. So that is what it's going for. And it's actually not that bad. Its physical defense isn't that bad, but it's not something worth going overboard to invest in. And Galar, Slowking Galar has, let's see, is designed to uh, survive Banded Urshifu, Surging Strike Urshifu, Surging Strikes, if it is 182 attack. So I think that is some kind of known EV spread. And it is able to survive 2 Life Orb Zapdos Hurricanes. 2 of them. So, and then the rest is in special attack. Finally, they have Finny, and they have physical defense in order to survive a Life Orb Dragapult Phantom Force 15 out of 16 times, has max speed, and the rest is in special attack. So, and for the how to pick with this team, and they say they usually have Finny plus Porygon 2 or Dragonite and a last Pokemon depending on the matchup. And the last Pokemon and Finny are usually there to kind of break through their defensive backbone. So either they're right, it's because Magnezone, Marowak Alola, and also even Slowking are all really good at pressuring opposing switch heavy teams. And they say if you want additional wall breaking power, you want to bring Slowking Galar, Porygon 2 or Dragonite, and the last Magnezone or Marowak, depending on the matchup. So yeah, let's look at, that is it for the first team. And now let's look at the second team. So the second team by Yuto, this is definitely written in a pretty different fashion from the first one. And you could say it is just personal preference for someone to write this way. But also, I think it kind of reflects on what each of type of team, each of these teams are intending to do. The first is more of a cycle team, and that means that it is reliant on type synergy and world synergy as well. So it has the defensive win condition, more of a offensive wall breaker that has the defensive type synergy and all that. So that's why at the end they were saying, oh, you want to bring one of Dragonite or Porygon 2 and try to win wall break with Finny and something else. And this doesn't have anything like this because each of these Pokemon are able to win a lot of 1v1s. So Cinderace is a pretty standard Cinderace with Focus Sash. And I guess the only a little bit unusual part about this Cinderace is that it has 4 HP and 4 defense EVs. So that means that if you are familiar with how EVing works in level 50, it means that yes, this guy is wasting 4 EVs, but they felt that instead of trying to get maximum value out of each EV, it is just better to maximize attack and lose 1 stat point in HP as opposed to kind of trying to gain additional stat point in defense, HP, defense and HP and all that in exchange for losing even more physical attack. And for special defense is of course to deny the download boost from Porygon 2. And 4 HP is actually there to be able to counter opposing Cinderace and just guarantee the KO as opposed to leaving them in at 1 HP. Gunk Shot is for Finny, of course, and they have the counter as I mentioned above. Porygon 2, it is an offensive download Porygon 2, so that is a bit rare. And they have Hyper Beam, Discharge, Ice Beam, and Recover. And it is mainly intending to Dynamax, as you can see from the Hyper Beam. And it is able to have a strong matchup against Landorus T, Dragapult, and other physically defensive Pokemon that Cinderace has trouble with, including something like Hippowdon. So for download, one big thing that a download Porygon 2 can do that Analytic can't is that if you are special attack invested and get the download boost, you can just Dynamax and max Hailstorm opposing Hippowdon, and that should be a clean one-hit KO. And they do say download activation can sometimes lead to information leaks, so they might just switch out immediately out of that, which can be a bit of a headache. And so they are saying if because of the download, a lot of times that your opponent is kind of able to read the Dynamax, and for example go into Mimikyu on the predicted max strike, and kind of ruin your game plan that way. And so you have to kind of watch out for that. Dragonite is adamant multi-skill, and it is choice band, and it is able to basically wall break other physically defensive Pokemon. They say physically defensive Porygon 2 has difficulty switching into Bandit Outrage, and that is a really big deal in terms of trading 1-for-1. But they do say if you are locking yourself out into Outrage, be careful because it could lead into setup opportunities for things like Mimikyu. And yep, and then they say also Rillaboom, oftentimes if you see a Rillaboom, you are going to be a bit forced to bring Dragonite, so that's something that you have to watch out for. As you can see, Porygon 2, Nihilego, Water Urshifu, and Swampert all aren't really the best matchups against Rillaboom, so yeah, that does make sense here. That you almost feel a bit forced to bring Dragonite, but yeah, don't leave your Dragonite at home and just lose to Rillaboom, is what he is saying. And the next Pokemon is Nihilego. It has the special speed increase EV spread, which is pretty standard. Has Meteor Beam, Sludge Wave or Sludge Bomb, Grass Knot, and Stealth Rock. So this is pretty standard, and it is good against Zapdos, of course, but it is also, as they said, a lot of times steel types weren't very common right now because, of course, the Zapdos, the Cinderace, and the Urshifu. It's actually a pretty tough time to be a steel type in the meta right now. So, but sometimes when you do see them, or you also can see things like Garchomp, Excadrill, Ferrothorn. So these Pokemon, Nihilego has really tough time doing anything against, and that means that and they said usually you just want to avoid picking Nihilego completely, because if you look at these types of teams, it is indeed gotta win those 1v1s. Unless you can lead with the Yawn Swampert and set up your Dragonite like that. Otherwise, you're going to have to rely on winning 1v1s. It's not a team that has a lot of ability to switch into things. So yeah, if you get your Nihilego blanked by something like Excadrill, you could just lose the game from there. So you want to avoid that kind of bad situation from the get-go. Swampert, he said it is a Yawn Swampert. It's pretty Yawn, Earthquake, Flip Turn, Stealth Rock. So I guess the main difference from standard is that it does have Earthquake, and that means that it's able to kind of hit a lot of other substitute users for bigger damage, and that is pretty standard though. And they say either bring Swampert or the Nihilego for the Stealth Rock is what they did a lot of times. So if they have a Steel type, have a Ground type, which they usually will, and they said so that's why they usually ended up bringing Swampert instead. And finally is Water Urshifu. It is a Life Orb Dynamaxer with Surging Strikes, Close Combat, Thunder Punch, and Ice Punch. And they said usually it is your best option against defensive, switch heavy, almost stally teams. And that's why they liked having both Thunder Punch and Ice Punch as opposed to having Max Airstream, which they also felt like they could use. But of course, Ice Punch and Thunder Punch really helps against defensive Dragonite and also things like Toxapex. So that is definitely a good set here. And they said difficult matchups for the team were Dragapult, Weakness Policy Dragonite, opposing Nihilego, and Mimikyu. And also dual screens into bulk up Cinderace. And not Cinderace, and dual screens into setup sweep. They said those are the main problems that they have. And let's look at the third team. Do I have time for a third team? I guess I did. Third team is again another offensive cycle team. So they said they wanted to build around defensive, especially defensive Landorus T and physically defensive Toxapex. And they had good synergy together and covered a lot of the metagame. And they wanted to build around that. So they said usually Landorus T and Toxapex are the main cores. Porygon 2 and Mimikyu are usually the last Pokemon, unless the matchup calls for either the Heatran or the Latias. Latias is the first Pokemon on the list, but it is the final Pokemon they added to the team, they said. And Aura Sphere, they have Aura Sphere, which is usually not standard on Latias, but with that move, they were able to check, not check, but able to break through things like Dark Urshifu and also Tyranitar, which was a good thing. And also they have Lumberry, and that means that they were able to pick this against things like Yawn leads, which actually kind of increases its utility a little bit. And it's also really fast. The rest of the team is actually really slow. And Latias kind of gives that speed safety net that I really like on this team. Second Pokemon they have is the Landorus T, the Citrus Berry, and they are careful with nearly max special defense. And it doesn't say what the 28 speed EVs are for, but it is there to outspeed Adamant Cinderace after max Airstream. And that means that this type of Landorus T, even though it has no physical defense investment, but with the Intimidate and the Citrus Berry, it is actually able to also handle Zen Headbutt Cinderace, which is a huge problem for usually teams that have Porygon 2 plus Toxapex and rely on that defensive synergy. And you can also use Landorus not as a Dynamax sweeper, but as kind of like a pivot cushion and intimidate user to kind of intimidate the opposing physical attacker and then set up with something else in the back, like something like Latias. So that is also a big deal. Heatran is pretty standard. Magma Storm, Flash Cannon, Earth Power, and Taunt. And yeah, this Heatran is, as they say, it is a pretty reliant on luck, but by having the air balloon as opposed to some other item like Weakness Policy or Leftovers, anything like that, is able to basically switch into most Heatrans for free, and also beat opposing Porygon 2 Toxapex cores. So that is going to be your main out against opposing Toxapex P2 mirrors.
and yeah. Also, it's good against Cresselia as well. Mimikyu is a Scarf Mimikyu, which isn't very common, but it is able to use Will-O-Wisp and Trick. And that means that your follow-up Pokemon will have a much better time kind of cleaning up, especially the Landorus T, and as well as the Latias. Landorus T usually is gonna be the main beneficiary of Trick. And but also Porygon 2 and Toxapex, they kind of appreciate having Trick Scarf, just because in order to break those two Pokemon, usually you want to have some kind of boosted damage, and if you trick them, they're not actually setup sweepers don't like getting their item turned into a choice scarf usually, so that is another synergy that you can look forward to. Porygon 2 has a bit of a mixed EV spread, has some special attack, also has some special defense, a mix of everything, and it says they said they wanted a bit more matchup against opposing Porygon 2 Toxapex type of teams. And in order to do that, they had Substitute. And that also ended up helping out against things like Urshifu and Cinderace, having the option to set up sub and kind of read what they're trying to do, and also having that modest natured analytic tri attack, also pretty helpful against both Urshifu and Cinderace. And you can actually Dynamax this, which is also pretty good as well. And they said try to avoid tricks and status moves, and try to win with Porygon 2 as your main endgame win condition. And finally, Toxapex, physically defensive Toxapex, very standard. And what else? Yeah, they said they are using Toxic plus Baneful Bunker. And in that way, kind of they're not relying on the Scald Burns to put chip damage on the opponent. They're able to kind of proactively put the opponent on a timer and cycle around its bad matchups. So yeah, and picking with this team, usually they said using Intimidate and other support moves like Trick from Mimikyu, and winning with Porygon 2 Toxapex defensive core, as I said before, and that is their main way of winning, and also main way of picking this in team preview. And they said for Latias and Heatran, they are more of a hidden win path, because I'm not so sure if how hidden of a win path Balloon Heatran really is, but Aura Sphere Larias definitely is. It will catch a lot of players off guard, and yeah, and it's a pretty good team. They said they weren't too happy about it, mainly because the Larias and the Heatran weren't too reliable. But as you can see, Toxapex, Porygon 2, Landorus, Mimikyu, that is a very solid backbone to a team. And even though there are a lot of counter teams that are popping up to these types of Porygon 2, Toxapex, Lando teams, including things like Ninetales, it is still a really good core. And as you can see, this guy has shown exactly that. And I guess that is going to be, that actually took a lot more time than I thought it was going to be. So this is going to be it for this video. But if you guys are interested in more videos with similar content like this, be sure to let me know in the comments. And that is it for today. Thank you guys for watching. See you next time. Bye.